In this short video, I'm going to take some code and I'm going to refactor it to a desired end state. I'm going to do this twice. The first time I'm going to do it in a fairly ad hoc way, where I'm just going to write the code and see what happens. And then the second way, I'm going to do it in a more structured way. At the end, we'll compare the differences. Here's the original code. We have an order class. The order has an ID. It has a number of lines which are made up of the item code and the quantity. And then we also keep track of whether or not the order has been placed. When we add an item, it will add a new item with a quantity of 1. But if we add another item with the same item code, that quantity will be incremented. We can place an order only if the order has items, and also we can't place an order twice. And finally, we can print an order. This takes an order printer, and it can only ever happen if the order has been placed. And the printer will take a list of order lines. So this bit of code here is converting our hash of item code to quantity into a list of order lines. For the refactoring, we have decided that we don't want to use this hash map directly in the order class. Instead, we're going to replace it with an order lines class. This will move the logic for adding, removing and updating order lines into the order lines class and leave this order class to focus on the domain logic. For this first attempt, I'm going to take a fairly ad hoc approach. So I'm going to convert this hash map into an order lines class. But before I do that, let's make sure the tests are passing. So the tests are passing, they're good. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say we're going to use an order lines class here instead, which doesn't exist yet. And at this point, everything is broken. So the compiler won't even compile. We've got errors. We can see IntelliJ has highlighted various things which don't exist. So let's start by creating the class. We now have the class, but we've still got more errors that we need to deal with down here. So next, let's take this code here, all the code for adding the item, and let's create a lines or order lines.add method to do this. And we can just cut this out and paste it into the class. So that's that, but now we need to create the lines field. So this will be a hash map exactly as it was in the order class previously. So this is a hash map of item code to quantity. And we'll also need to initialize it. So we just create a new empty hash map. So now we've still got another error here, so nothing is compiling yet. So let's just add this method. This one's quite simple, we just delegate through to the hash map. And then we come back and we've got one final piece of code here that's got some errors in it. So this is the bit that converts the hash map into a list. So let's copy that, or cut that actually. Do a lines dot as list. Again, create the method. We need to give it a return type, so this will be a list of order line. And then we can just paste in the same code that we had before. Pull that, add the semicolon, inline this to make it look nice. And finally, if I run the tests, everything is working. So we've done the refactor. It didn't take long. It was fairly straightforward. This was a fairly small refactor, but throughout the whole process the code was broken. We couldn't compile and we couldn't run the tests. So if this was a much larger refactor, that time that the code wasn't working would be greatly extended, and this kind of builds up quite a bit of anxiety around wondering when the code is going to start working again and wondering whether or not anything is broken. So with that in mind, let's take a look at another way of doing it where we try and keep the test passing throughout the entire process. So I've reset the code back to the original state. We can run the tests again, see they're all still passing. So now let's try this in a slightly different approach. We're going to build up the new implementation in parallel whilst adding it in slowly to make sure that it's working, but all the time keeping the existing implementation working. Once the new implementation is complete and has taken over, then we'll start removing the old implementation. The important thing here is that the tests will be passing all the time and the code will be compiling all the time. So this time, instead of changing this here, let's just create a brand new field which we'll call new lines. So this will be order lines, and we'll call it new lines. I'll make it a new order lines, and we'll create the class, and we run the tests. So we're still passing, nothing has broken. Now let's start to add the piece of code that we need here. So very similar to last time, we'll just add, or just copy this code here, and we'll create our new add method in here. Again, we will need to add this hash map into here. That's before, wrong button. So we created the field, it will be a hash map of item code to quantity. Make a new hash map. Again, at this point, we can run the code or run the test, it's still passing. So now we'll add it into here so that it's actually being called. So we'll say new lines dot add item. Again, run the test, we can see it's passing. So we've added it in there, it's now being called, but we've still got the old implementation existing here alongside. Now let's go and do something similar here. So we need a lines.isEmpty. So let's come back into here, create a public boolean isEmpty method, and we'll return this lines.isEmpty. And now we can replace this call here with new lines.isEmpty instead of lines.isEmpty. So now for these first two methods, add item and place, we're now using the new implementation. We've still got some code in add item, which is sort of making keeping the old implementation working. But until we fix this print method down here, we need to have that there. So let's go back. Let's add our new method. So public list order line. We need to import list. We'll call this as list, as we did before. We can just return null for a minute, so we can still see that we're passing, we're not using this yet. Now let's go and copy this code here. So we'll copy that, paste that into there. So again, we can run there. Everything's still passing, but we're not using this yet. So now we can come back into here and we can replace this with new lines dot as list. Now if we run the code, we can see that it's passing. So the tests have always been passing. We're now fully using the new implementation, the order lines implementation. So now we can start removing the stuff that we don't need. So let's inline this here. Now we can come up here and we can see this is no longer needed. So we take this out, run the tests again. We're still green, everything is good. And now we can see up here that lines is not being used. So we can just ask IntelliJ to remove it. And then finally, new lines is probably not the name that we actually want. So let's rename this back to lines. And run the tests. And we're done. There may not appear to be much benefit in doing it one way over the other. However, if you have a larger change to make, the second way really pays off, because you're always confident that the code that you're writing is working. There is actually an even better way we could do this. We could rely much heavier on IntelliJ's automated refactoring tools, and this would keep the code passing the entire time. I'll save that for the next video.